I'm here to take possession. These are the keys to the courthouse. We are ready to move forward with full confidence.
They say the biggest mistakes in history weren't made out of malice, but out of arrogance. Meet Brenda. For 3 years, Brenda has used the HOA as her personal weapon to make my life a living hell. She's fined me for the length of my grass, the shade of my curtains, and even the unauthorized sound of my wind chimes. But last week, she thought she finally found the kill switch. She handed me a global settlement agreement. Her terms were simple. I drop my $20,000 lawsuit against the board, and in exchange, the HOA clears my debt. But Brenda was so eager to finish me that she decided to write the contract herself using a hacked-together AI template. She wanted the language to sound ultra-professional, so she copy-pasted sections from a quitclaim deed she found online. What she didn't realize, and what her $400 an hour lawyers would have caught in seconds, is that she had accidentally listed her own $700,000 home as the settlement consideration. She didn't just ask me to drop the lawsuit. She accidentally signed over her entire life's equity for the price of a quiet title signature. Brenda wasn't just confident, she was smug. "Sign it, Michael," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper on silk. "This is the only olive branch you're ever going to get. You sign this, and I stop the foreclosure proceedings on your house. You don't sign it, and by Monday, I'll own everything you've ever worked for." I looked at the document. My heart was pounding, but not out of fear. I was looking at page 4, section 9, property transfer. There it was, her home address, 114 Oak Lane, listed as the property being relinquished to the plaintiff to settle the debt. I looked up at her, playing the part of the defeated victim. "You're sure about this, Brenda? No more fines, no more lawyers?" She scoffed. "Just sign the paper and let me get back to my life." I didn't hesitate. I signed my name in the grantee box. Then, with a flourish of pure, unearned confidence, Brenda signed her name as the grantor. She didn't even read the line. She just wanted the win. She had no idea she had just become a tenant in her own house. Brenda went back to her office to brag about how she broke me. I went to the county courthouse. When the clerk saw the document, her face went through 3 different stages of shock. "Sir," she said, "this isn't a settlement agreement. This is a deed of gift. You realize the vice president of your HOA just transferred her title to you for $0 and legal release?" I just nodded. She was very insistent that we settle today. The clerk didn't ask another question. She hit the document with the official seal, and just like that, the digital ledger of the county updated. 114 Oak Lane was no longer the home of the HOA queen. It was mine. And the best part? According to the immediate possession clause Brenda had copy-pasted to be tough, I had the legal right to change the locks by sunset. Brenda had spent years trying to kick me out of my house. Now I was about to show her what a real eviction looked like. There's a specific kind of silence that happens right before a storm hits. It's the kind of silence I enjoyed for exactly 45 minutes while the locksmith finished the final door. Brenda's house was everything she preached about. Perfectly manicured boxwood hedges, a non-compliant free lawn, and a porch so clean you could eat off it. She had spent a lifetime making this place a monument to her own rules. She just didn't realize that as of 2:14 p.m. today, those rules were being enforced by a new landlord. The locksmith handed me the new set of keys, heavy, silver, and cold. "All set, boss," he said, looking a bit confused at why I was changing the locks on the vice president's house while her car wasn't even in the driveway. "Thanks, Jerry," I replied. I stepped inside and the smell of expensive lavender and authority hit me. I didn't touch anything. I just sat down in the designer armchair in the foyer facing the front door and waited for the Queen to return to her castle. I heard her before I saw her. She was on the phone, likely bragging to the HOA treasurer about how she'd finally handled the Michael problem. The key slid into the lock, but it didn't turn. I watched the brass handle flex as she tried to force it. Then came the frantic jiggling, then the impatient knocking. "Stupid thing," I heard her mutter through the wood. She tried again, her breathing getting heavier, the Karen rage beginning to simmer just below the surface. Then she did exactly what I expected. She didn't call a locksmith. She didn't check her paperwork. She pounded on the door with her fist. "Michael, I know you're lurking around here somewhere. If you've messed with my property, I'll have you in jail by dinner." I didn't move. I let her scream at the wood for a full 60 seconds. Then, very slowly, I turned the new deadbolt. Clack! I opened the door just 6 inches, still attached to the security chain she had insisted every resident install for safety. Brenda's face was a shade of purple I didn't know existed in nature. "What are you doing in my house?" she screeched, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling the police! You're trespassing! This is breaking and entering!" I just pointed at the folder in her hand. "Read page 4, section 9, Brenda, the part you copy-pasted from the quitclaim template." She snatched the paper, her eyes darting across the legalese. I watched her hit the line, "Grantor Brenda V. hereby relinquishes all rights, title, and interest in 114 Oak Lane to grantee Michael S." She stopped breathing. Her hand started to shake so violently the paper rattled. This is a mistake," she whispered, the arrogance draining out of her like water from a cracked vase. "It was a template error. It's not valid." I leaned in closer to the gap. "It's notarized, Brenda. It's recorded. And according to the immediate possession clause you insisted on including, you aren't a homeowner anymore. You're a guest. And unfortunately for you, I'm not running a bed and breakfast." Brenda did exactly what every neighborhood tyrant does when their world starts to burn. She called for the cavalry. Within 10 minutes, she had 2 deputies on her lawn, convinced they were responding to a home invasion. She was pointing at me, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and genuine panic. "He's in there! He changed the locks! He's a squatter! Arrest him!" I didn't run. I didn't hide. I waited until the lead deputy, a veteran named Miller, who had dealt with Brenda's grass-height complaints a dozen times before, stepped onto the porch. He had his hand on his holster, his face set in a no-nonsense mask. "Sir, step out of the house with your hands visible," he commanded. I complied, but I didn't come out empty-handed. I held out the blue folder, open to the page with the county recorder's holographic seal. "Deputy, before we go any further, you need to see the deed. I'm not a squatter. I'm the record owner of this property as of 3 hours ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Miller read the document once. Then he read it again. He looked at the seal, then at Brenda, then back at the paper. "Brenda," Miller said, his voice dropping the professional edge and replacing it with pure disbelief, "is this your signature on the grantor line?" Brenda lunged for the paper, but Miller pulled it back. "It's a mistake! It's a fraud! He tricked me into signing a settlement!" I stepped forward just enough to be heard. "Deputy, she's a vice president of the HOA. She drafted this document herself. She brought it to me. She notarized it. There was no trickery, just a very expensive copy-paste error in a document she insisted was final." Miller sighed, the kind of sigh a man gives when he realizes his Saturday night just became a legal nightmare. He turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, I can't arrest him. This is a civil property dispute with a recorded deed. According to this paper, he owns the house, and since he has the deed and the keys, he has the right of possession." Miller looked at his watch and then at Brenda. "The law is the law, Brenda. He's the owner. If you want to fight the validity of the deed, you have to do it in court on Monday. But tonight, you can't stay here. I'll give you 20 minutes to gather your essentials. After that, if you're still on the property, I'll have to cite you for trespassing." Watching the woman who had spent years trying to evict people over unapproved patio furniture being told she had 20 minutes to pack her life into a suitcase was the most cinematic moment of my life. She walked past me on the porch, clutching a Louis Vuitton bag and smelling of defeated lavender. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. She just stared at the recorded stamp on my folder, realizing that her own arrogance had turned her into the very thing she hated most, a person with nowhere to go. As her SUV backed out of the driveway, I looked at the 114 Oak Lane sign. I didn't take it down. I just leaned over and adjusted it, making sure it was perfectly legally straight. Owning a kingdom is one thing. Holding it against a desperate queen is another. After the sheriff escorted Brenda off the property, the neighborhood fell into a deathly, unnatural quiet. But I knew Brenda. She wasn't the type to go to a hotel and cry into a pillow. She was a creature of backroom deals and emergency meetings. Around midnight, the ghost in the machine woke up. I was sitting in her office looking through the pending actions folder on her desk when the smart home system began to glitch. The lights in the hallway flickered once, twice, and then the electronic window shades throughout the house began to descend simultaneously, sealing me inside a windowless fortress. Then, the voice of the house, the AI assistant Brenda had programmed with her own recorded voice, echoed through the speakers. "Intruder alert. Security protocols engaged. Local authorities have been notified of a silent alarm." She was trying to smoke me out. Brenda hadn't just left the house, she had kept the admin codes to the integrated security system. From a smartphone in some cheap motel room, she was weaponizing her own home against me. The smart locks on the interior doors clicked shut, turning the office into a cage. The temperature was plummeting, and the alarm sirens, hidden in the walls, began a piercing 120-decibel shriek designed to disorient and deafen. It was a brilliant Karen move. If I broke a window to escape, she'd have me arrested for destruction of property. If I stayed, I'd be trapped in a freezing, sound-blasted box until Monday morning. But Brenda forgot one thing. In her global settlement agreement, the one she copy-pasted so carelessly, there was a clause about ancillary assets. Section 14 clearly stated that the transfer of the property included all integrated technology, intellectual property associated with home management, and administrative credentials. She wasn't just harassing me, she was committing a felony by accessing a system she had legally signed over to me 4 hours ago. Brenda thought she was the only one who knew how to use a template. I called David, my lawyer, on speakerphone. "David," I said, over the roar of the sirens, "she's hitting the remote override. Are we recorded?" "Loud and clear, Michael," he replied. "The 2nd District Court just issued the emergency protective order. Her remote access is now officially an act of domestic terrorism under the new cyber harassment statutes. Push the button." I hit the enter key. The sirens cut out instantly. The shutters hissed as they retracted, letting the moonlight flood back into the room. Across the street, I watched Brenda's SUV suddenly go dark. I had used the administrative transfer protocol to lock her out of her own cloud account, not just the house, her email, her bank-connected apps, and her HOA portal. The screen on her dashboard likely read, "Credentials revoked by owner." I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain. I didn't wave, I just stood there, silhouetted against the light of the house she no longer owned, watching as the sheriff's cruiser, the same one from earlier, pulled up behind her SUV. Brenda didn't get to sleep in a motel that night. She got to sleep in a cell. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes with a sunrise after a night of total warfare. By 6 a.m., the Cyber-Siege was a matter of police record, and Brenda was sitting in a holding cell, waiting for a judge to explain the difference between smart home settings and felony harassment. She had tried to burn the house down from the inside out, metaphorically speaking, but all she'd managed to do was provide the final nail in her own legal coffin. As I sat there on the porch, the very porch where she had once stood to hand me a $500 fine for having a non-standard welcome mat, I realized the sanctuary was no longer her fortress. The queen of the HOA hadn't just lost her title, she had lost her base of operations. Without her house, she didn't meet the residency requirements to be on the board. Without her board seat, she was just a civilian with a very complicated lawsuit. The power she had spent decades cultivating had vanished because of a single, lazy, copy-paste error. The news of Brenda's accidental transfer hit the neighborhood like a lightning bolt. By noon, my phone was blowing up with messages from neighbors who had been bullied for years. They didn't just want to congratulate me, they wanted to know if it was finally safe to breathe. I didn't keep the house for long, of course. I'm a writer, not a landlord. I made a deal with the bank to settle Brenda's outstanding mortgage and sold the property to a young family. A couple who had been rejected by the HOA 3 times for failing to meet the community aesthetic. Before I handed them the keys, I held one final meeting on the lawn of 114 Oak Lane. No clipboards, no points of order. I stood in front of the people Brenda had terrorized, and I handed them a stack of voluntary dissolution forms. Brenda's gone, I told them, and since she accidentally signed over the steering committee records along with the house, I'm officially resigning on her behalf. The HOA is no longer a governing body. It's a social club. Paint your houses whatever color you want. They say you should never sign anything without reading it. Brenda learned that lesson the hard way. She thought she was signing a death warrant for my lifestyle, but she ended up signing a deed of freedom for the entire street. I looked at the sanctuary sign one last time as I drove out for a celebratory lunch. Someone had spray painted a single word over the HOA logo: home. Brenda is still tied up in court, trying to argue that human error should void a notarized deed. But the law doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about your signature. And in this neighborhood, the only signature that matters now is the one on your own heart. My name is Michael, and I live in a place where the grass is exactly as long as we want it to be. Case closed.